What a show we have for you this week. I'm Lars Clint and I have new certification exams, a serious Linux vulnerability, and an interview with the man behind the new cert. It's like something sweet, something sour, and something hot. Yeah, that analogy totally works. The last couple of years, the certifications in Azure have been focused on the existing services in Azure, such as with AZ-900 Azure Fundamentals, AZ-104 Azure Administrator, and AZ-204 Azure Developer. While that suits students and professionals that are in the cloud already, what about the many IT professionals that are still working with on-premises infrastructure and are looking at the cloud as sort of an add-on? Recently, the AZ-800 exam addressed part of this area by covering the Azure Stack Hub hybrid cloud products, and this week there's a new certification for you. Windows Server Hybrid Administrator Associate Certification. Bit of a mouthful, but anyway, instead of me telling you all about it though, I went straight to the source, Orin Thomas, and to get his thoughts on it. I'm here with Orin Thomas from Microsoft. Thanks, Orin, for joining me. And Orin is one of the people behind the new certs of AZ-800 and AZ-801, as it's called. So thanks, Orin, for joining me.
No worries, Lars. Good to talk to you again.
Yeah, no. Orin's actually not too far from me, but because of, we can't leave home restrictions, etc., we have to do it via Zoom. Otherwise, we do it in person. So maybe next time. But yes. First of all, I want to know, what are these two new certs? Or it's one cert, it's two exams. I should be specific here. So 800 and 801, what are they?
Well, what they are is that they are a certification that is dealing very much for people who are implementing hybrid technologies. So what they're designed around is for people that, for example, are responsible for managing very traditional Microsoft on-premises types of networks, but who are starting to reach up to the cloud and are starting to integrate those existing on-premises network with the appropriate cloud services, such as Azure Arc, Azure Backup, Azure Site Recovery, and so on.
All right. And so on from that, why do we need two exams? Because everything so far has sort of been, everything's been dwindled down essentially, or boiled down to one exam, except for the architecture one.
So the reason that we have two, and two is fairly pared down, is that there are a vast variety of technologies that someone who is an on-premises Windows Server administrator or Windows Server hybrid administrator actually deals with. And in the first exam, we start off with the core, what we call the core ones, which are identity, storage, management, networking, and compute. What we're looking at there is your meat and potatoes roles, all of the things that you would absolutely need to know, and especially when we're covering things like storage and networking, things that you need to know before you start moving into more complicated topics. In the second exam, we're looking at security, high availability, backup and recovery, troubleshooting, monitoring, and then migrating on-premises workloads into Azure. So the idea there with the second exam is that these are the topics that you would hit once you had those foundational or those core topics done.
Yeah, right. So I mean, that all makes sense, and it sounds like it's quite a large topic. So why did you choose to do it now? Is this because the cert was ready, or is there a specific, history behind why this is a good timing for it right now?
With this focus on role-based certifications, what we don't want to do with a certification, and what was certainly done 20 or 30 years ago, is 20 or 30 years ago, certifications would be released and they would talk about things that were brand new that you would never have used. Whereas with a role-based certification, it's really about attesting to stuff that you might be doing or that is within reach of you doing right now. So with the hybrid story, Azure's hybrid technologies have now reached a level of maturity where people are actually implementing them in the real world, where we're seeing people start to use Azure Arc, start to connect their event logs into Azure, Azure Security Center. And we also had the bonus of the approximately 3-year release cadence of Windows Server, with Windows Server 2022 being released. And we sat there and we thought, you know what? Windows Server 2022, one of the things we want to get across is how good this is in hybrid situations. We've got these great hybrid technologies. This would be a good time to come back to certification on Windows Server, because we've got a good story here. Whereas if we'd done it prior to now, it still might have been a bit too biased into the Windows Server and there wasn't enough of a hybrid story. But now we feel we've got a really good story and a realistic story for what people are doing, so that people who, and everybody's on at a different stage in their hybrid journey.
No, so that makes sense. And you said, people are different parts of the journey within hybrid, and I totally agree with that, because, I've done a few presentations on multi-cloud and the hybrid and how that relates to each other and yada, yada, yada. And it's just people everywhere. So who is your target audience for these 2 exams and this one cert?
Out of the bat, it's obviously people that work with Windows Server on a daily basis and are starting to use or already use Microsoft cloud technologies, or at least interested in starting to use the Microsoft cloud technologies.
We're going to create a course on this certification without a doubt. When? I don't know, sort of out of my hands. But right now, I'm assuming you can take the exam right now in beta. I think that's right. But where do I go to study for it? What is the best path to actually get some knowledge on this area?
Okay, so actually you can't take the exam in beta, and the beta won't actually be available until December. So what I'll do, there'll be a link on the bottom of the screen to a blog post that I wrote that actually then links out to 2 study guides. And what those study guides have is that they have a list of the exam objectives, and they have a list of relevant docs.microsoft.com articles and MS Learn modules. So that's one place where you could start. So one of the reasons we wanted to get, when we announced the certification, put up some study guides as well, was to not only prime the pump for students who were thinking of taking the beta in a couple of months' time, because studying for a certification, as you know, can take several months. So if you've got the material there, but also priming the pump for content creators or third-party ancillary content creators to start creating their own stuff, so that they're not sitting there going, wow, this exam gets released next week. We've got to start creating content. But that by the time the exams are released, in beta in December, and then sometime probably in the new year when the exams go live, by the time the exams go live, the hope is that there will be a whole lot of third-party content that people who want to take the exam can consume to help them prepare.
Yep. No, that makes sense. Thanks very much, Orin. I'm looking forward to see what happens with it. This is not exactly my ballpark. As you said, developers, that's me. But it is interesting because there's been very little sort of official Microsoft stuff around, especially Arc and some of the more hybrid technologies. So thanks for putting this together, you and the team, of course. And I'm looking forward to see where it goes.
Fantastic. Great to talk to you, Lars.
If you'd like to learn more about getting cloud certified, check out ACG's free plan. It gives you access to free courses and quizzes, plus learning paths and original series content. And you don't need a credit card to sign up. We'll be sure to include a link in the description below. Do you use Linux on Azure? Chances are that you probably do, as more than 50% of VMs on Azure are running Linux. Well, pay attention now. 4 security flaws allowing remote code execution and privilege escalation were found in the Open Management Infrastructure, or OMI, software agent silently installed on more than half of Azure instances. Yeah, silently, as in you didn't know it was happening. OMIGOD, OMIGOD, whatever it's called, that's the name given to the vulnerability by the cool kids. It affects Azure VMs that use Linux management solutions with services such as Azure Automation, Azure Automatic Update, Azure Operations Management Suite, OMS, Azure Log Analytics, Azure Configuration Management, or Azure Diagnostics. Successful exploitation enables attackers to escalate privileges and execute code remotely on compromised Linux VMs. Now, there are already reports of the vulnerability being used for, any guesses? Yep, crypto mining, of course. Microsoft has no mechanism available to auto-update vulnerable agents on all impacted Azure Linux machines though, so they've asked urgently everyone to manually update their VMs, including you. Yes, go, quick, go patch that Linux VM, come on. Details are in the description for this episode. What do you think of the new certification or the Linux vulnerability? Why not head over to our Discord server and join the conversation? Link is in the description. As we say on the A Cloud Guru team, when there is yet another Azure certification and we have just only finished getting our head around the last one, seek and you shall cloud. So see you next week and keep being awesome, Cloud Gurus.